going. I wasn't sure whether that was ready to go. So I'm Bec McMaster. I write sort of fantasy romance, and this is Amanda, who also writes fantasy romance and that. So we're just here to bring you a little bit of a session, on sort of what we write.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Let's do it.
Okay, let's go. Okay, so Amanda, you've been you write the award-winning sort of Kingmaker Chronicle trilogy, and then you sort of also got your sci-fi romance trilogy in that. So I've been loving your books as well, like over the last few years, and yeah, it's exactly what I love to read. And that, so I just sort of thought, well, why don't we, start off with, why don't you tell us a little bit about your books?
Sure. So the Kingmaker Chronicles is a trilogy that's based in a world that uses Greek mythology. So I've taken this mythological concept that we know already in our own worlds, but I've transplanted it to a completely new fantasy world so I could really take it in whatever direction I wanted. So I've got the basis of these myths and gods and monsters and legends, but then they're sort of living their own lives from there within this new fantasy world and affecting the characters' lives as they go about their business and trying to, sort of an epic quest type of novel, changing the world. And the gods and all this mythological stuff is in the background. So if you like Greek mythology and battles and magic and dragons and this kind of thing, and epic quests and big saga type books, then the Kingmaker Chronicles trilogy is going to satisfy all of that. And then the Night Chaser series, which I think in Australia they're calling the Endeavour trilogy, is a futuristic fantasy. So instead of being totally it is in a new world because it's out in space in the future and it's not Earth-based, but it is sort of an extension of our own world as we know it, just far in the future. So there's things that, we could refer to from Earth and the past and everything, but it's, I like to call it my Robin Hood meets Star Wars space romance. So we've got sort of the Robin Hood band of thieves on a mission trying to better the world against a sort of tyrannical dictator that is trying to control everything. So you've got this battle between sort of the rebel underdogs and the big overlord, and all of this is set in a distant future.
Yeah, I actually love Night Chase, so that was such a really exciting sort of start to kick off the series. I haven't read the second book yet, but definitely on my list.
Well, it just came out a couple of months ago, so yeah. Thank you.
That's okay.
Thank you so much.
One of the things that I love so much about your books is, like, as I say, there's that really epic feel to them. Like, it's not just like contained within the one book. Like, it's such a big thread that sort of runs over like a series of books and that. So with Kingmaker, how did you come about that? Like, what was your sort of journey to being published there? Like, was it the characters that came to you first, or the world, or just the mythology kind of plunged you into it?
No, the mythology actually just was sort of accidental as I started writing, and I thought, how am I going to work this whole theological system? And so that's sort of where the mythology came in. But the actual story, it started with the main character, whose name is Cat. And I had her in my head, and I had her physically in my head, and I was trying to work out her personality. She's a real mix of strengths and weaknesses and fierceness and vulnerability. So I was sort of building up all these different character traits physically and emotionally, and I wasn't quite sure what to do with her, but I had this scene in my head, which ended up being the first scene of the Kingmaker Chronicles in A Promise of Fire, the first book, where she's hiding out undercover, not really undercover, because that, just hiding out, trying to keep her identity secret in this traveling circus full of people with lots of magic. So they're putting on this spectacular show, and she also has magic, but she's sort of hiding it and keeping it really discreet and trying not to actually be discovered as the Kingmaker, who she's posing as a soothsayer, but the Kingmaker is someone who can tell the future through lie, or tell the truth through lies. So if somebody lies to her, she knows straight away it's a lie, and she knows what the truth is. And this is a really huge political weapon in this world of 3 realms where the kingdoms are fighting and people want to take control of the whole kingdom. So there's obviously someone who comes along who wants to take control of the kingdom and sees how powerful Cat is. And that's the hero of the story, Griffon, only he turns out to not be quite as interested in Cat's magic as in Cat herself. So we have the romance.
I was just about to ask about him. I was like, yeah, so what was your inspiration there? Was he like as strong as Cat for you, or he just sort of like came into the pages sort of to like kickstart her story, and then he, decided he was,
Well, that's a great question, because it actually evolved also. When I started out writing, it was really going to be about Cat, the book about Cat, and a fantasy with a touch of romance rather than a fantasy romance.
Oh, okay.
But as soon as I got both Griffon and Cat on the page, I knew it had to be a real romance, not just with aspects of romance or elements of romance. It's like, no, this is a romance. And these 2 characters are going to be so important to the story and to each other. And so his role kind of evolved once he was on the page, and their banter started. They started sort of snipping and snapping at each other, but the attraction was there, and it was so much fun. And I just knew that had to be a huge part of the story now, instead of just sort of a catalyst to push Cat into her destiny. So yeah, Griffon, as strong as Cat, in a lot of ways, yes, but more sort of emotional stability. In terms of powerfulness, in terms of magic and gods, it was sort of always Cat who could win any battle, but in my mind. But that's why I gave Griffon certain invulnerabilities, so that it would sort of level the playing field, because otherwise Cat, who's super fierce, would just stomp all over him, and then it wouldn't be an interesting love interest or love story.
Yeah, I love that, where like he was like, her magic wouldn't work on him, so it was just kind of like the one person that she's finally found that she can't just
you can't just walk all over. So then of course he was much more interesting and frustrating and annoying and attractive, and so yeah, that was what made. Otherwise I had to give them some kind of equal playing field, otherwise she was just too overpowered and the relationship would have no it wouldn't be equal in any way.
So interesting there, you're saying the romance wasn't the first thing that sort of struck you when you were writing that book. Were you writing romance before you started their story, or was it just something that was the start of it, where you evolved into it?
No, I had tried to write romance before this story. I'd written things that have never been published.
Yes.
But I started with a time travel romance that I tried my hand at, a paranormal witches type thing, which also involved time travel. I really loved, I started writing 15 years ago maybe, and time travel romances were very popular then, and I loved them, and I loved reading them, and it inspired me. I wanted to try writing them, but I never ended up actually reworking the book, rewriting, editing, all that. I always just kind of went on to a new story instead of feeling like this was the one I wanted to try and publish. And then when I hit on A Promise of Fire, I'd actually just finished reading the Poison Study series by Maria V. Snyder.
Yeah.
And I absolutely adored it. And it was definitely fantasy based on the main female lead character. And there was an element of romance. I usually like a little more romance, but even that pretty much satisfied me. And I really loved the way she structured the book and how it was. And so I thought, well, maybe instead of writing full-blown romance and paranormal type things, I should try a fantasy with this kind of element of romance. But because I'm such a romantic at heart, and I love romance novels, and I love everything romance, as soon as I started writing it, I couldn't stick to that. I was like, yes, this is fantasy, and it's my own world that I've created, and bringing in the Greek mythology, but it's definitely, you know, there's 50% fantasy and the plot and the epic quest and the world building, and there's 50% this relationship that is, and the people, the characters are growing individually and in terms of their relationship. And it was definitely like full-blown romance then. So it's definitely a fantasy romance rather than a fantasy with romantic elements. Because we have the steamy scene too. It's definitely not fade to black either. So
yeah. Well, who can blame you when Griffon walks on screen? Like, you just have to roll with that.
Agreed.
So you've obviously, like, fantasy was something that you were reading. Was that something you grew up with, or like fantasy movies, fantasy books, or was it just you know, something that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was like my only thing, but I definitely liked it. I always liked. I did like reading fantasy. I read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and so there you've got your main basis of, you know, the fantasy, how a fantasy world is built, which was, you know, a great basis. And I don't know, do you remember the books that were inspired by the Dungeons and Dragons games, the Dragonlance books?
Yes.
Okay, I must have read about 15 of those. I love them. But I also read other stuff. I mean, books for, I was really into riding horses when I was younger, and so I read all the horse books I could get my hands on. It. And romance, I don't think it started till I was 15 or 16, and then I started reading romance, and I loved it. And so then, yeah, it was just a big mishmash. I don't think I read much sci-fi, but I liked it on television shows and movies. So I was more of a visual sci-fi person, which I think is why when I wrote Night Chaser, it ended up being so, it's really a visual story. You can really, the writing is really visual. I think that's because I like to feel like I was watching it.
Yeah. I was just about to say, going into Night Chaser with Tess and Shade. So again, was that Tess speaking to you there that sort of started that kernel of that idea?
I think so. Yeah, it always seems to be the heroine for me, who's the beginning of any story, and then everything builds on around her. Is that how it works for you too, in general?
Mostly the heroine. I like heroine centered and that. So especially, which is I find interesting because you've gone first person point of view, and that was that sort of because that was the main voice speaking, or?
Yes, especially for Cat, and it was just so. She was so strong in my head that the first person point of view seemed normal, and then because I had written that way, that's why I chose to write Tess and Night Chaser in the first person point of view also. But I think like you don't always sort of follow the rules and write what's expected of you, and I kind of do that too. For example, I threw in her Tess with the first person point of view, but Shade, when he has not too much point of view in Night Chaser, but when he does, I put it in third person because it was a way to show that it was Tess's story and he was just coming into it, and we'll see what happens with him. And then in Starbreaker, which I know you haven't read yet, but the second book, I actually ended up doing first person point of view for both characters. And that was an indication that he was now really part of this group, you know, he'd earned his place. And I think sometimes I see reviews like, what is she doing? It's first person, it's third person, but you know, there's always a reason behind it for me, and I'd rather do what I feel tells the story best as an author than just fit into, you know, the rules.
Yeah. I suppose too, it's a nice way to get inside his head as well, and like see from his sort of point of view, and so you get like that even sort of aspect of both characters. So I'm excited now. I'm going to have to like put that up to the top of my reading pile.
Oh, good. I hope you like it.
So with your series, who's your favorite character that you've written?
That's hard. I love all of them. I think it's always the heroine though. Like we said just a minute ago, I think we're both heroine centric in our writing. And so for me, Cat in the Kingmaker Chronicles, I mean, she's just such a strong presence and such a strong personality, and there's such a huge evolution in her character, going from sort of scared and aggressive to learning to control her emotions better and fight for everything she believes in, and take responsibility for who she is. And Tess in Night Chaser, she knows who she is right from the start, and she's so steadfast, and she's really steady and sure of what she's doing. Even if lots of things she does, she's not, you know, things happen and she has to adjust, and she's not sure of herself, but in terms of her mission and what she wants to accomplish, she's very steady. And I like that about her. There's a real loyalty to who she is and to what she wants to do. So I guess it's always the main heroines, but I do love the heroes too, Griffon and Shade. I love how supportive they are of their leading ladies, you know, and without being, you know, pushovers. Like, they really stand up to them and help them to realize their full potential, rather than just being a crutch or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I tend to think of it as the best part about, like, the hero is, like, you know, he's like, hey, I'm gonna stand here, you go get him, girl, and, like, you know, but if you need me, I'll be here. Like, you know, they've got the facts that they're, like, you know, they're more than aware that their heroine is, like, fully capable of handling all this stuff herself. So yeah, no, I think that's what I love so much about your characters. Just out of curiosity, with Kingmaker, how do you keep the chemistry running between your two leads over the, like, 3 books? Because I think a lot of romance, like, you know, a lot of the romance is about the chase, and then once, you know, they're kind of together, like, how do you keep that chemistry sort of rolling throughout the three books in that series?
Yeah, when you have the main characters that remain the same throughout the trilogy, well, structurally, first of all, I made it so that the first book is really the slow burn and the build up. So it really is the chase, and in terms of the romantic aspect. And then the second book, it can get into more sexy times because we finally actually have the relationship. And the third book is more about the emotional bond, because they found each other now, and now the mission, what they have to accomplish in the fantasy world called Thaleria, reuniting the 3 realms under new leadership, is, you know, the main focus of the third book, as well as Cat coming into her magical abilities and her position as a queen. And so then the romantic arc really becomes about how they work together better as a team, how they confront every obstacle, and how it makes them stronger together. Yeah. So I guess overall, I mean, there's the whole getting to know each other part, and learning to lean on each other and sort of fill in their, if one has certain strengths and the other weaknesses, that, so basically they're like building one person together in a way, you know, who his strengths and her strengths fill in the gaps for the other where there are weaknesses. And so I think that's part of them learning each other and figuring out each other and the relationship. And I try not to throw in, there's external conflicts that comes at them. Mm-hmm. And so they have to figure that out together. And like I said, it's sort of like about teamwork and building each other up and being the best that they can be together. I try not to, in the beginning, there's the internal conflict between them, you know, why they're keeping apart, etc. But I try not to, once they're together, I really try not to throw in random, you know, obstacles just to keep them apart. That's not the point for me afterwards, once they're in a relationship. The point for me is they're in a relationship, and now let's see how they move forward together and how strong they can become as a team. Yeah.
And I think too that sometimes, like, with bringing in, like, random conflicts just to sort of keep that momentum going, it sort of cheapens that relationship that they found, like the strength of that relationship. So no, I like that concept. That's really cool. What are your favorite fantasy romance authors or fantasy authors?
Well, I'm reading your Shadowbound right now. I'm thinking it's absolutely wonderful. um, it's really exciting. I love how descriptive you are. I feel like my senses are alive with your writing. There's the colors and the tastes and the feel of everything around you is really present. So that's really exciting, and I'm loving it. So I'm really excited to have started that. And otherwise, well, I have lots of favorites. Jennifer Eastep, Jeffy Kennedy, Grace Draven, Maria Vale. It's a little more paranormal because it's based in our own world, but the world building is so fantastic that I almost like to think of it as fantasy. That's about a wolf pack in New York State. I'm sure Maria Snyder with her Poison Study series and several other books as well. I'm probably forgetting tons of authors that I love and read all the time, but in terms of fantasy, that's what I can think of right now.
No, fair enough. I have a couple of questions from one of the readers, Alina.
Oh, cool.
So she just wants to know what you're working on at the moment.
Well, right now I'm writing the first book in and expanding the Kingmaker world. So the original trilogy was about Cat and Griffon, and there are lots of secondary characters that played a really big role and that readers became really attached to, and I've always wanted to give them their stories as well. So I'm working on the first Kingmaker spinoff, which is about one of the members of Beta Team, and then I will continue working on those team members and the other secondary characters in the future as well. But that's the one I'm doing right now. And after that, I have the third book in the Night Chaser series, the Endeavor trilogy, to finish or to actually start. So so I'm writing. So I will have to finish out the Endeavor trilogy. But first I'm writing the first Kingmaker spinoff. And that's what I've got in the works right now. So I have 2 books under contract, and when those have been completed, then in my mind anyway, whether it's with in any way, shape, or form, I'm going back to the Kingmaker world and writing those secondary characters' stories for them.
I think there'll be a lot of readers who are really excited about that. So is that going to be with those secondary characters? Are they just getting one book, or is it going to be a 3-book arc, or?
Well, the first one I'm working on is about Flynn, and that'll just be 1 book. But so instead of doing the trilogy format like with Cat and Tess, where they're the main characters for 3 books, no, I do just plan on having it more of a series. So we're staying in the same world, but 1 book, and then the next book will change main characters. So a little bit of a more traditional format. I don't plan on writing trilogies for all of those characters. Although maybe one might get more than 1 book. We'll see. The one everybody wants. I won't give any spoilers.
I was going to say, I was like, who would that be? And Alina's also asking, what's your favorite genre to write in?
To write in? Well, fantasy romance, for sure. I think I'd like paranormal romance too. I like anything where I can build my own world and create the system and what everything is about. And I think that's so freeing and fun. You have a blank canvas and you add layers upon layers and you build this world and you create this whole new universe for yourself and your readers. So fantasy, and I consider Night Chaser fantasy too. I don't really think of it as sci-fi because it's not tech heavy. It's not really sciencey. Really, it's fantasy. It's about the adventure and the characters and the emotions, and it just happens to be set in a futuristic setting. So
I think too, it's got a really epic quest sort of feel to it as well. So that's that's where I noticed the very similarity between styles, if you know what I mean. Yeah, even though there's slightly different genres, like definitely feeling that epic sort of quest part about it.
Yes, definitely.
Now, I was just going to ask, so segueing on to your world building part, how do you start with your world building? Like, do you draw maps or like, you know, just daydream about like where you're going with that, or just, yeah.
I've drawn a few very bad maps. I actually saw you post about maps the other day, and they look so good.
Oh no, that's the final version.
Well, I just have scribbles, and it's erased half of it, and my mountains are little carrots. And I draw maps once I need it. Usually, I just start out. It's sort of as I go. It's kind of like with my character information or world building information. Because I don't really plot much out in advance, I just kind of go with it right organically and make it up as I go. But then I don't want to forget, so I'll jot something down, like this character resembles this, like, you know, physically or emotionally, or, you know, something about the character, and I'll write it down. And something about the world I'll write down, or a map, I'll sort of start constructing it as I go. When I need, if my group needs to travel on to the next city and I don't know what city that is or have a name for it yet, I'll, you know, sit around thinking, okay, am I going to say it's northeast and it's and then I have to come up with a name for it, and then I'll put it down on the map. So it's all just kind of building as I go.
Very organic. Yeah.
Yes. And I basically plot out in my head, so I think I do plot more than I give myself credit for, maybe, because I do think about things, but I keep it all in my head, and I don't bother writing it down, because I know so much will evolve in the meantime that I'll just end up with the bones of that scene I have in my head, and it'll be new in terms of when I actually get to it, what I need to write, it'll be different than what I thought up, you know, 2 months ago. So
yeah. How do you find keeping track of all of that? Do you have like a world building Bible, or you just trying to find all your random notes? Or
it's a lot of random notes, which is probably not the way to go. With characters and the worlds, like terminology and things like that, I'll tend to make a big list just on a Word document and then add to it. But then I'll print it out at some point, and then I'll start jotting down on it by hand when I add things. So at some point I really need to go back in and kind of add those things on the computer and then print it out again. With the map, it's just a random piece of paper. But I have a lot of, you know, this size note, and I have a stack on my desk like this. And then I go through it when I'm like, oh, what did I say? Or maybe it's a phrase. Like I said, somebody's voice was, you know, smoky rich or something like that. And I want to remember that so I can go back and not use the same thing, but something related. So I'll write down a name and smoky rich, and then I'll have to go through my 50 Postit notes to find that. And then I'm like, okay, now when I want to talk about this person's voice again, I have to relate it to that, but not, you know, use the same word. So I guess I wouldn't say, overall, I'm a super organized person. So it's a little weird that this is my random method, but it is. What about you? How do you keep track?
Well, I'm just laughing because
hooray! I'm not alone.
I know when you were saying it, I was like, oh yes, this sounds very familiar. One little tip, I actually find I run a search in my little Kindle, and that really helps me find the details that I'm actually often without trying to go through all my millions of bits of paper. And my editor curses me. She's just, she's like, where are you keeping track of these dates? And I'm like, hang on a minute, just let me have a look through where's my timeline page. So yeah. No, I was laughing when you were saying that, actually.
I'll also go back into the actual books and, you know, look on the pages and try and find things, or I'll open up the final version that my publisher has sent back to me of a book, and then I'll search in the document for something, and usually I'll find it pretty fast. But then sometimes I get excited. I'm like, oh wow, this isn't bad, and I start reading again, and then I find myself reading 10 pages and not actually working on the book I'm supposed to be working on. But it's fun to get back into the ambiance, and at least I find what I'm looking for. So
puts you back in the mood.
Yes.
So just a little quick sort of wrap up to finish off. So just a couple of little quick questions that I thought, you know, we could answer quickly. You're into mythology, so favorite myth?
I think it would have to be Hades and Persephone.
Oh, yes, yes. Perfect one. Do you, favorite fairy tale?
Oh. Are we talking Disney version or real life? Well, real life is still a fairy tale, but
Whatever
they're pretty
you feel
grim.
like. Yeah.
Let's go Disney. Let's see. Beauty and the Beast. You know, I must have a kidnapping theme going on here. Beauty and the Beast, Hades and Persephone, Promise Fire.
The library. It's definitely the library.
Mm.
So I was just going to say, who wins in a fight between Tess or Cat? Or do you reckon they'd just be besties?
Well, I don't think they'd have any reason to fight. But if they did, it would be Cat. I mean, nobody can take Cat.
Do you have any inspiration for your heroes? Like any particular actors or anything that sort of you kind of like to cast in your head for your heroes and heroines?
Sometimes, yeah, sometimes. But they're more, I don't want to name a name in particular because they're more of a mix of different people. You know what I mean?
Yes. Sometimes it's just a look, isn't it?
What?
Sometimes it's just a look that they give, or there's like some kind of attitude that I find like with a certain actor, and you're like, yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Yes. You just want to remember that sort of fierce look, or that, you know, that one scene of something. So yeah, it's more of a mishmash of different actors that I might like, or pictures I might see somewhere. Even, you know, I live in the city and there's big billboard poster advertisements all over the place. And sometimes you just look at that guy in the jeans and you're like, wow. You remember, or the perfume ad or whatever. And it's, you know, these big billboards. And I think just things stick in my head, different little traits, or, you know, the way a hair curls here or there. I don't know.
You're like, he needs to be in a book. He needs to be in a book. Yeah. Was there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up tonight?
No, this was fantastic. It was so nice to see you. We haven't seen each other in person for a couple years now, I think. And
yeah, I know. It was Orlando, wasn't it?
It was Orlando.
Yeah. For those of us watching, Amanda and I we started out with Sourcebooks, so we sort of met through one of their author parties, and we caught up again at another of the RWA events in America. So it was lovely to meet you, and it's always nice to catch up with people who sort of like write similar like ideas of what you're sort of in your world, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
yeah.
I think we understand each other with all living in our heads so much.
Yeah,
using our imaginations. Well, thank you so much for this.
No, my pleasure, and that I'm sure all the readers will love getting to sort of hear more about your worlds and your stories and where you're heading to. So no, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Ladies, before I let you go, I'll ask you to hold up your sheets, please.
Oh yeah, we forgot about that. Sorry.
Thank you both. And thank you to Bec for hosting and Amanda for staying. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. You too.